to cause problems with agriculture and other things. So a little 101 wetland science. This is the types of wetlands that I deal with as a wetland scientist. You know, we go from open water wetlands to forested wetlands. There's every gradient of wetland in between. When we start talking about wetland restoration, and when we're talking about wetland restoration on this site, we're really talking, what we're restoring are these forested wetlands, scrub shrub wetlands, and wet meadow wetlands. These are the drier end wetlands. These are wetlands that are more difficult to restore. You got to do a lot more study, a lot more analysis to get these types of wetlands to succeed. So, but that is really what we're shooting for. Some key ingredients to wetlands: you need wetland soil, you need wetland hydrology, so the water's got to be there to create wetland soils, and you got to have the supporting wetland vegetation. When we do wetland restorations, we're often also looking for reference wetlands. So we're looking across the street, we're looking down the road, you know, what is this wetland? We're trying to restore a wetland, take an ag field and restore it to a wetland. And we need to look at what the native wetlands look like. So we're often, you know, driving around, going on some other properties and trying to figure out what the wetlands in the area, what they should look like. And that keys us in on how to restore things. From a wetland restoration standpoint, this is, you know, my first restoration. This isn't a picture of it, but it looked just like this. You know, we don't restore wetlands like this anymore. This is, if you want to do a livestock pond, or, you know, a duck, maybe a little duck habitat on your property, these are perfect for that. When we talk about wetland restoration now in the new era, we're not creating, you know, duck ponds like this. We're creating more of these forested wetlands, these scrub shrub wetlands. But I thought it was important to talk about the transformation. I've been around long enough to see this transformation of restoring duck ponds and now restoring these higher end, higher quality, more diverse wetlands that support a lot more vegetation species, insects, amphibians, birds. You know, we're looking for these higher end wetlands that are more diverse. So how do we do that? Well, on a project like the Henry site, it's a year or 2 years of baseline studies. So we are doing things like looking at doing topographic surveys, wildlife surveys. The upper right-hand photo is a picture of a groundwater well it has got a data logger in it that's monitoring water levels continuously for a whole season. And you know, we're looking at the soil types. We're also looking at things like cultural features. These two photos here of the cultural artifacts were actually found on the Henry property. These are some arrowheads and a stone axe that was found out there. You know, we have to evaluate these sites before we disturb them to look for cultural artifacts. And, you know, on the Henry site, you know, it was fortunate we found these. There wasn't anything significant that stopped the project, but I've got other sites where there's, for example, burial mounds that we find that, you know, can kind of alter where we how we do our restoration. So I mentioned a little bit about drain tile. I'm sure some of you have experienced drain tiles in the past. The little inset photo on the lower left kind of shows how drain tiles work. They're, you know, tiles below the ground, usually 2 to 4 feet below the ground, and they're buried with a slope, so they capture the subsurface water that's contained within the soils, and it acts to whisk it away, and it takes it down gradient, usually to a ditch or a stream. And these tiles are very effective. If this site that we're talking about wasn't drain tiled, this area probably wouldn't have been farmed. It needed to be drain tiled to be effectively farmed. So, so the two photos, I've got these side-by-side photos showing here. The one on the left is just a stripped down air photo, you know, but you can see these linear patterns on there, very straight line white features. If you go to where I've highlighted these in yellow on the right, those are the drain tiles. Those are the drain tiles that exist on this property. And I said before, there's over 3 miles of drain tile. There is a lot of drain tile on this site. And so this is one of the tools we use to identify, are there drain tiles there, yes or no? We assume there are until we can find evidence like this. And we need to map it. And then we actually need to, on this site, we needed to go out there and do some test pits and verify that those drain tiles were there, and then also disable them restore the hydrology. So kind of interesting to see those patterns show up so consistently. You can see those patterns year after year after year. So a couple photos of our drain tile work. We did lots of digging out there to identify and then to break these drain tiles, but we found all sorts of drain tile out there. We found clay drain tile that was probably installed in the 30s and 40s. We found concrete drain tile. We found drain tiles that were buried next to each other, like the lower left. We've got a 4-inch tile and a 6-inch tile buried right next to each other. So anyway, we've on this project site, we've disabled all those. We found those, disabled them. And then we've also GPS, that's what that upper right, that's one of our GPS units where we use to document in the field where we're at on the landscape to map these tiles and map out where we're breaking them and where we're finding things. So kind of an interesting site that way that, you know, I often think when I think about drain tile and I think about the people that installed them years ago and the equipment they had, you know, they didn't have big expensive backhoes, you know, that a lot of these were dug by hand or with really simple machinery. And to dig down 3-4 feet by hand is quite a task. And you know, we found some tiles on this site that were down 6.5, 7 feet. So they ranged from big, small, deep, shallow. This is just one of our initial maps that we created of the site. I told you there was about 3 acres of wetlands on the property. The purple shows where the wetlands were. The wetlands were on this site were seasonal wetlands. They were farmed every year, but they were wet enough during the springtime to call them seasonal wetlands. And so, but the entire site was farmed, even these seasonal wetlands. And you'll see on the next map, you know, what we're proposing here is the yellow is where we're proposing more of the prairie, more of an upland. The green and purple and blue is where we're restoring the wetlands. So you can see the conversion. I'm going to flip back here from all yellow to a little purple, mostly upland, mostly ag, disturbed every year by plowing, to what we're restoring is a natural system with a mosaic of habitats, the yellow being the mesic prairie, the green being the wet prairie, the purple is the scrub shrub, and then the blues are more of our forested habitats, and the browns are where we're planting upland forest to kind of buffer the forest. So, you know, we're really trying to create a diverse habitat here, a mosaic of different species. And the other thing to note, it didn't show up well on other photos, but it will now. This racing stripe down the middle here, that is a above ground transmission corridor. So that's above ground power lines that go right through the property. And this purple line that kind of traverses around the property, that is more of a passive recreational trail, a hiking trail. So I mentioned the site is on, I'm trying to find my cursor here, is on Goodwin and Woodland. Right at that intersection, there's a little parking area. So if you were to go out there tomorrow, you could park right there and you could walk around the site. There's also good viewing of the wetland along Woodland Drive, but also at that parking area. And you don't have to walk along the whole trail to get a good sense of the wetland. You can walk basically to the first bend in the trail and pretty much see the whole site. So hopefully, you know, maybe with this presentation encourages some of you to go explore. It is kind of an interesting site. Wanted to talk a little bit about some of the other technical parts of the restoration and show you how things work and how we restore, in this case, groundwater. Again, the drain tile that was installed was to depress the groundwater table. It's more of a perched groundwater table held in these clay soils, but the tiles did an effective job of dewatering the site or depressing the groundwater table in this area. So I've got 2 graphs here, and they set up to kind of mirror each other. The top graph is from 2018. Like I said, we did a couple years of baseline studies and we did groundwater studies. And you can see from this graph, the squiggly lines represent groundwater levels in different monitoring wells we have on the site. The blue bars on the bottom represent precipitation events. So from April to November, let's say, we were monitoring real-time data from these groundwater wells. We've had up to 9 wells on site. And the interesting thing, and you see this pattern repeat itself on a lot of groundwater wetland restoration projects, is in the spring, you got a lot of water on the surface, got a lot of precipitation runoff, and the dash line represents 12 inches below ground surface. So you see the water right at that root zone, let's say, and then if you don't get any rain, the water drops, especially in these drain conditions. And then as soon as you get a precipitation event, boom, it bounces up and then it drops, and another precip, boom. So this flashy behavior of this system in a drain condition is what you see repeated all the time in drained farm fields. One thing that favors, though, that kind of flashy condition, it favors things like reed canary grass and other invasive species that are tolerant to these, pulses of hydrology, let's say. The bottom graph is now real live data from this year, from April until just about a month ago, let's say, till the end of, or end of October. And what you see in this graph is you see we've modified the hydrology, we broke the drain tiles, and you see these graphs, they pulse according to precip, but they don't flash as fast. So they don't drop quite as fast. The trend is mostly a flatter trend as opposed to a real steep trend. And that's a sign of a successful wetland restoration. So we restored the hydrology from this real flashy system, drops to sometimes 3 feet below ground surface, like in a short period of time, to this more of a gradual trend to the drier condition. In wetland science and wetlands, the fall, late summer and fall, some of these seasonal wetlands are typically dry anyway, even in natural systems. So that trend to the fall and early summer or late summer is really typical. But what we're looking to do is restore that hydrology more in a longer term and minimize that frequency of up and downs. So that's a typical pattern. And we'll be monitoring these groundwater wells for the next 4 years, and we expect to see this bottom pattern repeat itself over and over. Just a little bit about the design of this project. I think it's important to note that I'm talking about this project, but there's a team of people that work on this project. It's within Stantec, there's a partnership. Outside of Stantec, there's a partnership of people like Jim at Woodland Dunes, and we're all working together. But for a design team for a project like this, I'm working with engineers, hydrologists, hydrogeologists, botanists, soil scientists. There's a whole team of people on these projects, and the design of a project it has to be done because in order to build a site like this, we have to collect all the data and we have to transmit that data to a design, and then we have to bring a contractor on, somebody with heavy equipment, to reverse some of the things that have been some of the drainage features that have been installed on these properties. So the design is really a critical phase to kind of transition the science part of the project into the construction part of the project. And we use our engineers to help us bridge that gap. So the work of engineers and scientists together is really important. And then the work of engineers, scientists, and contractors or construction people are really important. So those are real critical elements to a successful project. Within a design, we're looking at things like erosion control. We're going to do some grading on site. We want to keep the sedimentation out of the rivers. In this project, we did what we call tile breaks. So we're breaking all those drain tiles on 100-foot increments. We're building little shallow scrapes, little micro depressions in the landscape that maybe only drop down 6 inches, but they're enough to hold some seasonal water. We've on this project developed a term called hummock and hollow, which which is a term to represent what you see maybe in a wooded landscape, a wooded wetland, where you have, let's say a tree blows over, and when that tree blows over, it creates a depression or an area where the root ball got ripped out of the soil. That's more the hollow. And so we've kind of created that. I've got some pictures of how we created that on this project. Also things like we did a seepage outlet, more of an engineering type thing to maintain drainage from off-site on-site. So anyway, it's just a really important part to bring the team together, especially into the design phase and then into the construction. As far as construction, this project was actually done with some fairly light equipment. So we had a medium-sized backhoe, maybe a little dozer, a small dozer. You can see a couple small dump trucks on the property, but really this wasn't scrapers and big bulldozers and big off-road dump trucks. This is mostly a small scale restoration project. It took about probably 2-3 weeks to get built, and we had great conditions. We had nice dry weather. I think it rained and got a little wet near the end, but you got to deal with the weather on these projects because you're in low lying areas. The upper left photo kind of shows the seepage outlet. It's more of a kind of a French drain where we can discharge some water from the subsurface to the surface. That middle photo on the left kind of shows the finished product, and the one on the bottom shows the finished product. The backhoe up on top, we used Holzbach excavating just down the road on this project. Jim and I have used Holzbach on other projects, and they do a really good job. And the key to it though is you gotta work with the operator. We spent the first day out there with the operator, kind of making sure he understands these are subtle grading jobs, and we're not moving a bunch of dirt, but you got to move it in the right way. So up in the upper right, he's building what we're calling our hummock and hollow area, and the bottom photo on the right shows that completed, which again, you're looking at these very small isolated depressions scattered across the landscape. And to build that with a piece of equipment like that is really quite a skill that operator had. Just a couple photos to kind of show the before and after. These photos actually are of the exact same view. You can kind of see the power line, you can see the tree to the left of the power line, and then the wood grove to the right. In 2019, it was planted, it was dry as a bone, and here in 2020, right after it was built, we built it in late summer of 2019. In 2020, it restored itself very quickly. At least the hydrology did. Now in 2020, 2021 and beyond is really our goals are to establish this high quality native habitat. It's not all great news. We've had some setbacks on this project. I think every project does. And so I did want to talk about some of the challenges on this project. We had, in 2020, we had a number of drain tile blowouts, which are basically, we've broken 3 miles of drain tile, and in this case, one of them was missed. One of them was buried below another one. So we found all the drain tiles, and in one case, a drain tile was buried 2 feet below another one. So we broke the drain tile, let's say 3 feet, and it turned out we had a tile at 5 to 6 feet, and never knew it. So anyway, what happens is you get this water still flowing through some of these tiles, and it finds a blockage somewhere in that tile line, probably associated with some other tile breaks we did. And the little graphic on the bottom shows how these things can kind of bubble up to the surface. And basically the water has to go somewhere. There's so much pressure coming down the pipe, the water finds fractures in the soil and makes its way to the surface. And once you create that void in the surface, now it becomes a surface water pit, let's say, where surface water is draining into, and it's kind of this back and forth with groundwater pumping up and surface water going in. So anyway, we fixed those. But we had two different blowout periods, one in the spring of 2020 and one in the fall of, or late summer of 2020. And we got on them right away and fixed them. But, you know, it's just, I guess the point is, you know, the term adaptive management is really key to these projects, whether it's you're managing vegetation, you're managing the hydrology. The worst thing you can do on these projects is walk away from them. It's key to build them, manage the vegetation, in this case, manage these tile blowouts, and stick with it. And a lot of times that takes money to do it. And this program that DNR has that's funding this project, it's real fortunate that we have that backing to do these things and make these projects as successful as possible. A couple photos of our revegetation. We've done a number of things for revegetation. I've got a couple photos to illustrate that. First of all, we did native seeding, and there's all different times a year to do native seeding. There's certain times a year you don't want to do native seeding in the kind of dead of the summer, but you can do spring seeding, fall seeding, so seeds don't germinate in the fall. But in this case, we've done, in the upper left-hand photo shows some of our winter seeding that we did. Putting native seed right on the bare soil or on the soil surface, and then it kind of works its way into the cracks of the soil. A couple of these other photos show here, we've done some tree planting and some shrub planting. I want to say we had 7,000 trees and shrubs, if my memory is correct. And we just planted those in the last month out there. Mix of tamarack and I don't even remember all the species, but and there's a couple of our staff there kind of digging holes and planting those. So kind of a big effort. Some equipment, hand equipment, very talented people that get involved in this phase of the project too. Other types of revegetation we did what we call live staking. So we harvested some sandbar willow and red osier dogwood and tag alder from some of the adjacent wetlands on Woodland Dunes property, harvested them in the spring before they leafed out. And what we're doing is we're harvesting the stems of these species, cutting them into about 18-inch segments of stem, and then we're sticking them in the ground. And what happens is they then sprout. These are the kind of shrubs that will take to sprouting themselves in those wet, if their feet are wet, if they got wet conditions. And so the bottom photo kind of shows the area right after we got done sticking the sticks in the ground. And then literally these upper photos are from July. So just a couple months later, boom, they start to grow. And these species tend to grow really quickly. So, you know, it's a quick, easy way to vegetate a shrub community on these sites. Okay, some other nice photos, I think, kind of showing the diversity. The upper photo is the hummock and hollow area, and the other area is one of our scrub shrub transitioning to a shallow marsh and kind of wet sedge meadow area. But we've done 1 year of monitoring. So we built it last year. This is our first year of monitoring. In the first year, you got to remember there was nothing on this site last year, just soybeans. So in the first year, we have 154 plant species on this site. And of those, 109 of them are native. And that results in a really high quality community already after the first year. We call it an FQI rating, but anything over 25 in an FQI rating is high quality. And again, we've got these 4 different plant communities: wet meadow, scrub shrub, mesic prairie, and hardwood swamp. And we've got a 5-year management plan. Like I said before, you build it, you got to stick with it. And what we're finding in this first year of monitoring is we really got to pay attention to things like cattail, reed canary grass, and Canada thistle. Those are going to be our bad actors. We found them sprouting up right away. They're already starting to outcompete some of the natives. And they can be problem species because they're persistent. There's some other, you know, annual species that show up. You know, they're not going to show up next year in the same numbers. But these we want to take control of, and these are the ones we're going to focus on for future management. Okay, we've done some wildlife surveys. This is where we've partnered with with Jim and some volunteers at Woodland Dunes to do wildlife surveys on the site. So monthly, there's been wildlife surveys pre-construction as well as post-construction. So just some overview, you know, in this year, we've documented 36 different species. 6 of those are species of greatest conservation need. We've got a couple mammals, herps, and insects on these sites. You know, this wildlife observation stuff is something that we could do better at. So if there's people that, you know, who like to survey for birds, survey for wildlife, I'd love people to, and they live in the local area that can document things out here. This would be great stuff to document, and easy way to get out of the house and walk around and just share information, because it's really important to see how these sites function, not just for what's the wildlife or what's the plant community growing, how did the groundwater get established, but how's the wildlife responding? And that's really important. The center photo here is you will see this when you go out there. This is a tall osprey nest structure. This is another opportunity where we brought other partners in to help us. This was installed for free as an in-kind service by ATC and one of their contractors, MJ Electric. And this is a recycled pole from another power line. So this was going to get recycled. So we were able to grab it, and they installed it for free. So it was really kind of a nice addition to the site. I have got 2 little clips here that some of our staff took of some of the wildlife. I wish I knew somebody on this call, I'm sure, knows what these are, but let me play these quick. I just think that's great. I don't know, shorebirds make me smile. This other one is one of the gull species, and pay attention on this one. You'll see swallows zooming in and out of the photo too. So there's we saw all sorts of wildlife out here, but I like this video too. Let me get it started. Yeah, I love the swallows zooming in and out of the slide. Oh, sorry. Okay, my last slide. Thanks for your patience. Just kind of what I like to look at is kind of look back and say, how did this site become successful? First, it became successful because of good partners like Woodland Dunes and people with some vision like Jim Nickelbein, who was open to taking a chance on a program like this to restore wetlands on this property. Dr. Henry played a key role in this, and as well as others. So, I mean, it starts at that. Then, like I mentioned, bringing in these technical people that have certain expertise in certain areas. We're really looking to restore natural landforms. So we're not looking to create duck ponds. We're looking to restore what this area was historically before it was turned over in cropland. Other keys to success, a couple of years of baseline studies, really doing your homework on these projects, being out there educating the contractor, working with the contractor, not just saying, hey, go build this and I'll see you in 4 weeks when it's done, working hand in hand with the contractor. And then, the real important stuff is adaptive management. So you build it, and then you gotta monitor and you gotta adapt. Like I said, if we're getting reed canary grass in some areas, we're gonna either mow that or herbicide it right away. We're not gonna let it go to seed, and that's really important. And then I think also all these projects that I work on, I think it's important to do just what we're doing tonight is tell somebody about it, talk about the benefits of it, do some outreach, educate others, kind of get other people interested in what's happening, not only in their backyard, but also in the field of wetland science. This is kind of a growing field, and in a field that I've learned a lot in the last 35 years, and I'll continue to learn, and the next generation will continue to learn. Some of the things we're doing today, we'll be doing something different down the road. So it's kind of it's nice to share that information. And that's all I have, Jess. I think I'm pretty close on time, so I'm happy about that.